in this community for many different kinds of activities, but I think that only your closest friends know the tremendous interest that you have in history, how you've studied it and how you've applied it to your life. So to kind of launch our conversation, I'd like to talk about your own history. Born in Kingsport, Tennessee.
Kingsport, Tennessee. Yeah, it's just a tiny little place. You know, most people know it as one of three cities. It's called the Tri-Cities area up in East Tennessee. It's about, my hometown is about 90 miles east of Knoxville, Tennessee. And Kingsport, Johnson City, and Bristol, Tennessee are all about the same size, about 40,000 people in each city, and each one of them are exactly 20 miles apart. My family has the records on my great-great-grandmother. She was bought in the early 1800s, maybe the late 1700s, as a slave in Savannah, Georgia. She was bought by a man by the name of Alfred Bond, and it's not a coincidence that my great-great-grandfather, his name is Alfred Bond. That's on my dad's side, and then on my mom's side, my grandfather's name was Leaper. So I'm a Bond, you know, from the slaves up in Kingsport, and then about 13 miles away in Hawkins County, it's a little tiny place called New Canton. And it's like a little hole in the wall, but you go off the main highway 11W, you go back down in this little country place, and it's about 300 or 400 black families down there, been there since before slavery.
Wow.
And my grandfather's name was Ed Leaper, and everybody knows that the Leapers is one of the oldest black families in Sullivan County, and then my family, the Bond family, up in Kingsport is one of the oldest black families in Kingsport.
That in itself shows why you would have such an affinity for Bear Creek after you came to Irving, but I don't want to get ahead of myself there.
Well, you know, it's amazing because, you know, I didn't even think about it when I was going through it. Yeah. I mean, you don't think about things when you go through it. You know, you know, the older you get, you reflect back. Yeah. But looking back on my life, God was preparing me for coming to Bear Creek. And the love that I have for Bear Creek was born from when I was real young. You know, I've always, my mom and daddy separated when I was 11 years old. Both my parents were alcoholics, and my mother and father used to fight a lot. And one day my mom just got tired of being beat up, and she left 6 of us with daddy, and daddy stayed there and took care of us. But not just daddy, we had an extended family. My grandparents, my daddy's mother was like a surrogate parent to me. And then my mother's parents, Papa Leaper and Granny Leaper, they sort of took up the mantle when Mama left. Yeah. And I spent most of my time with my grandparents.
You shared with me that you were particularly close to your grandmother.
Oh, I used to love to just follow Granny and Papa around and just listen to them have their conversations with older people. Yeah. I just always, and another thing is both my grandparents on both sides, they really loved the Lord. And you know, ever since I was a little boy at 2 years old, they instilled in me a tremendous love for God. So much so that I remember my mom used to always tease me she told me when I was about 2 years old, I spent a lot of my time on the farm, with my grandfather, Papa Leaper, and he raised tobacco. He had a little 14-acre farm. It wasn't big, but to me it was like it was a huge farm, you know. But I used to get up in the mornings with Papa, and he'd give me a little, almost like a little teacup full of corn. And I used to go out there and help him feed the chickens.
Oh, okay.
But my mama always used to tell me that I used to take a little cardboard box when I was 2 years old, and I'd get on top of that cardboard box, and I'd be out there throwing the chickens, feed to the chickens, and I'd act like I was preaching to the chickens. And I can remember, and I remember this very fondly, and I just think God instilled it in me from a little boy. I can remember going to that little old country church, and even going to my home church in Kingsport, Shiloh Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. I went there from the first through the I mean, from when I was a little boy until I was 18, when I left to go to the Air Force Academy right out of high school. But I can remember so fondly how, you know, in churches, if you've ever been to a black church or any Baptist, I was raised in a Baptist church,
Yeah.
you know, they have the call to open the doors of the church. And then people are supposed to come up and the pastor invites, is there anyone here that hasn't given their life to the Lord? Would you please come? And, you know, so many Sundays, nobody would come. And I felt sorry for the pastor. And boy, sometimes I can remember it. Mama used to have to hold me back. I was kicking and screaming and crying. I said, I want to go up there. I said, nobody else will go. I want to go.
I want to help him out
I wanna
here.
help him. Yeah, and so, you know, I just think from a very early age, you know, my grandparents and my parents and all my aunts and uncles, you know, they just instilled in me that, you know, regardless of what your circumstances are, and we grew up very poor. You know, I can remember, I don't know when, I think I was about 12 or 13 when we got our first TV. I can remember, you know, like around January of every year was when they showed The Wizard of Oz.
It sure is. I remember that too.
And so we used to go, I used to have to go down the street, me and my three brothers, I got three brothers and two sisters, so we'd all find somebody's house we could go to, and that was a big deal, boy. And then, you know, it was, the movie started out in black and white, but boy, when it came over to color, we thought we was at the movies.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, that was a big deal.
Yeah. And I can remember those days as well, and I think that you and I also share another similarity in that you were also in segregated schools until you were in 5th or 6th grade, I don't remember.
We segregated schools. Well, I went to Douglas High School. If you come to my hometown right now, there's an African-American section, sort of like Bear Creek. It's called Riverview. And Riverview, sort of like Bear Creek, it's on the other side of the railroad tracks. It's almost amazing that in a lot of black communities all across this country, I don't know, it's impossible for it to be a coincidence. They located blacks across the railroad tracks. Yeah. And so we're no different. But those were some of my fondest days in my educational career because I was a straight A student from the 1st grade to the 5th grade, that all black school. I never made anything less than an A because all my teachers, I guess they saw something in me. I was my 1st grade teacher's pet, my 2nd grade teacher's pet, all the way up through the 5th grade. And I had my 1st grade teacher was the same lady.
Ah, okay.
And she used to take me, you know, everybody tells me I print real, even now. You know, I'm 55 years old. But I print, they say, I print better than any man that they've seen. But you know the reason why? Miss Dobbins, she was like a surrogate mother to me, my 1st and 5th grade teacher. She would take me, she'd let me stay after school because she knew sometimes I'd go home and wouldn't have nothing to eat. So she'd let me stay after school and she made me print on the blackboard every day. And then she'd take me home and give me some cookies and milk, and then have me print and read some more at her house. And I attribute to who I am today in terms of my educational career and my love of learning to Mrs. Dobbins and all those teachers at that school. The school spirit at that all-black school, I've never felt that spirit before. That school was from 1st through the 12th grade. Oh. And then we integrated the schools in Kingsport when I went in the 6th grade. And I went to Lincoln Elementary School. And I'll never forget it till the day I die. I got my first report card after the first 6 weeks. And I made a D. Oh boy, it was like.
That had to be a shock.
Oh, I was crushed.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then the teacher, she was real sweet. She saw that, you know, coming from that black school, you know, even though we were nurtured and we were taught, but we had hand-me-down books. See, at that time, in a lot of places all across America, the white schools would use all the educational curriculum, and then when the white kids got through with it, they would send it over to the black schools. So I can remember from the 1st through the 5th grade having our readers. You know, in the 1st grade, you've heard. I'm sure you remember this. You know, you read about Lucy Walks and Lucy Talks and Lucy Drinks and all those kind of little books like that.
Yeah.
All of our books, the pages was torn. The other white kids had written over sometimes I can remember, you know, they had already drawn in the books, and those are the kind of books that we had growing up. I mean, in the 1st through the 5th grade. And so when I went to the 6th grade, my teacher told me when she couldn't understand why I was so upset, you know, and crying. I was crying every day. And after I got my first report card, and she said, I can remember she brought me into a conference. She said, "Why are you so upset?" I said, "Because I've never made anything less than an A." And I said, I think I made 3 Ds.
Whoa.
And she said, "Well, Anthony," she said, "the reason why you're a little behind." She said, "It's not because you're dumb and because you're not information that you need to be able to compete and make good grades, and with the other white kids." So that whole year, boy, it was hard. But she spent a lot of extra time with me too. And so I made D's, for the first part of the 6th grade, and then around Christmas time, I started making B's, C's and B's, and then by the end of the year, I was making all straight A's again.
You were back.
And then from the 7th grade all the way through high school and all the way through college, I was an A/B student. I graduated from Dobbins Bennett with honors. And then I went on to the University of Tennessee. Well, before I left Dobbins,
I want to ask you about that. What made you decide on the Air Force Academy?
Well, my daddy just wanted his son. I tell you what, growing up as a little boy in Tennessee, poor, one of the things I remember most, my heroes were my uncles. I'd go to my Uncle Alva's house. He was in the Army. I'd go to my Uncle Oscar's house. He's got a big picture of him on the wall. My daddy was in the Army. He was a black belt in karate, and he taught karate in the military. So, and then I'd go to my pastor's house, and my pastor was in the military. And then I'd go to some of my teachers' house, and everywhere I went, I saw black men with their pictures on the wall in their military uniform. So since I was a little boy, I had it in my heart. I said, one of these days, I'm going to go to the military. So when I graduated from high school, I was on the National Honor Society, and the congressman, I can't remember the congressman's name, but he took an interest in me, and he wrote me a letter of recommendation to the Air Force Academy. And at that time, I had to go to the prep school. Even then, I had missed out on the SAT score by about 100 points to actually get into the academy. So they had an Air Force Academy prep school where you'd go there during the summer, then you'd take the SAT, and then you'd go on and matriculate to the big academy, Air Force Academy, in the fall. Well, it didn't work out that way for me. I went to the prep school, Air Force Academy prep school out there in Colorado Springs. Number one, I'll never forget it. It was June 18th. 1972, first time I'd ever been outside the state of Tennessee.
Oh my goodness, culture shock.
First time I'd ever been on an airplane. I'll never forget all my brothers and sisters, and Daddy came to the airport to see me off. I'll never forget, I was crying like a baby. And all my brothers and sisters was crying. I thought I might never see them again. And then I went out there and I stayed for 3 months. From June 18th, I got out there in Colorado Springs, and I remember I left on September 18th, 1972. I called my daddy on that morning. I said, "Daddy," I said, "I know that you want your son to graduate from the Air Force." And I was doing good, and I was going to go on to that academy. But I always had in my heart that I wanted to be a doctor or a minister. And so I went and talked to my commanding officer right before I decided to leave, and he said, "Well, Anthony, if that's what you really want to be, the Air Force Academy, our primary target is to turn out pilots." And I knew I didn't want to be no pilot.
After that first plane ride, you're like, no.
Ain't no way. So I left the Air Force Academy on September 18th, 1972, and 3 days later, I enrolled at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville on September 21st, 1972. I graduated with honors on December 10th, 1976. With a major in medical technology. I've worked in medical laboratories from 1977 to 1995. I worked my first job was Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Yeah. I worked there from 77 to 82. And then in 82, I actually finally got my chance to actually be full-fledged in the military, because see, I had to get a honorable discharge from the Air Force
In order to leave.
in order to leave the Air Force Academy.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So then I went and I'd been working, from 77 to 82, and I was training other medical technologists. And the Navy had sent had a Navy training program, and for medical technologists, because they didn't have enough.
Ah.
And I was actually training a Navy recruit at Vanderbilt University. He said, "Man," he said, "you ought to, they're looking for medical technologists like you in the military." And he said, "They'll give you a direct commission." So I applied, and they gave me a direct commission. I went in as it's the equivalent of a second lieutenant in the Army and the Air Force, and the Army, Air Force, and Army and Air Force is second lieutenant. In the Navy, the lowest officer designation is an ensign.
Oh, okay.
So I went in as an ensign, and I was stationed at Plymouth Park, not Plymouth Park, Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and I supervised the hematology laboratory up there for a couple of years. And then they transported me to the Marine Corps Air Station at Cherry Point, North Carolina. The Navy provides all of the military, medical, the medical needs of the Marines. See, the Marines don't have officers that are in the medical field. The Navy, I was a medical service corps officer. So, and then they transferred me to Cherry Point, and they had a little 38-bed hospital there.
Oh my goodness.
And I headed the laboratory. I was head of the entire laboratory there. I really, really, really enjoyed it.
So remind me, was it the military that moved you to Texas, or was it something different?
No, I only served in the military from 1982 to 1986. My mother got cancer right after I got out of the military. And I was one of the only people that was free enough at the time to go back and stay with my mom. And I stayed with my mom on and off until she got sort of stable. Mm-hmm. And I was there from 84 until 88. And in 88, that's when I started having a lot of trouble myself I was drinking myself to death. And I had a brother, Marvin, that lived here in Irving. And my brother that just passed away, Billy, lived in Plano at the time. And they saw that, and my life was beginning to spiral out of control. And Marvin said, "Well, why don't you come out here and live with me?" and move to Irving. And that's what brought me to Irving in 1988. And I struggled, I told you when I first came to Irving, I became a workaholic instead of alcoholic. I was still alcoholic. But I tried to substitute work for the alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I worked 2 full-time jobs. I worked for Rheumatology Associates at St. Paul Hospital from 88 to 1995. And then I opened Zell Lipsky University Hospital. I was the only medical technologist in the laboratory in 1989 when they opened Zell. We only had 12 patients in the ICU. But boy, those first 2 or 3 days, I was the only person in the lab.
It was a quiet lab.
Oh,
for a couple
it was
of days.
a busy lab. No, I was working my buns off.
But nobody to talk to.
Nobody to talk to. But within the next week, they hired some more people, and I stayed there until 1995.
I have to tell you, I absolutely cannot imagine how you worked for 2 full-time jobs.
To be honest with you, I did it for 5 years. I don't know how I did it either.
Yeah.
I was drinking myself to death. Part of the reason. You can do a lot when you are living in a otherworldly world.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
And you're living in denial. Yeah,
in
I guess
denial,
you can't
of
push
course.
yourself.
And so, 94, I just got tired of it. Mm-hmm. And one day I was just, like I had hit rock bottom. And I got down on my knees and I prayed a prayer. And I was very emotional that night. I'll never forget it, June 24th, 1994. And I got down on my knees and I said, "Lord," I said, "I just can't do this by myself. I can't break it. My parents were alcoholics. I've got aunts and uncles that are alcoholics. I've got cousins that are alcoholics. I mean, it's a disease. And I believe it's hereditary. I really do. I think a segment of it is.
Yeah, and I think there's some science now that supports that.
But anyway, I got on my knees. I said, this is what I prayed. I said, Lord, if you could take this desire for alcohol away from me to where, I just can't do nothing without having a drink every day. I said, if you will do that for me, I'll dedicate the rest of my life, every second of every day, to do whatever you have in store for me to do. And I checked the next day on June 25th. I checked myself into Arlington Medical over on Matlock, and I stayed there for as an inpatient for about 3 or 4 weeks, drying out, cleaning up, and thank God, it changed my whole life around. And I thank those counselors and over there. I haven't seen them since then, but they changed God used them to change my life. And then after I got out there, about a month later, I was still doing some outpatient. When you do inpatient intense for 3 weeks, and then they keep you on outpatient. I was on outpatient treatment for about 3 or 4 months after that. But on July 28th of 1994, I had one of the most it's the most life-changing experience I've ever had in my life. I had a dream. And in my dream, I was sitting behind that bush with Byron De La Beckwith, that old white man that killed Medgar Evers. It was the most vivid dream I've ever had before then and since then.
Yeah.
And I saw him take his rifle. I saw Medgar pull up into his driveway in his little station wagon. I saw Medgar shot. I saw him go down. I saw the blood spread. I saw Merle coming out of the house screaming and hollering. I saw all that, but I had read it in a book too, and I'd seen the movie. But in my dream, this was a dream. And I'll never forget, I woke up, it was like about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was sweating just profusely. Sweat was just pouring off of me. And I immediately got down on my knees and I said, Lord, what does this dream mean? And I just felt like God telling me, start an NAACP chapter in Irving. I said to myself, I was sitting on the side of that bed. I said, what? NAACP? I'd never thought of, I've been a part of NAACP on and off. I'd marched with Martin Luther King down in Nashville, Tennessee.
That had to be an extraordinary experience to march with King. And you were there in where did you march with
Nashville.
him? Nashville. And were you in Memphis as well with
Well,
him?
we came to Memphis. We didn't actually, Memphis was in 2 different segments, if you remember. They had the riots when they had to rush him out.
Yeah.
I came after they rushed him out, and they wouldn't allow Martin to come back out on the street. He wanted to, but we were there, shortly before he was assassinated. Those were some wonderful days. To be honest with you, I can remember that was back in 1968, and I can remember even in my hometown, I couldn't hardly walk the streets from home to, I ran track. So, I would go to school, and then after school, I'd have my track practice, and almost every day for about 3 or 4 months, couldn't hardly go home without seeing blacks and whites fighting like cats and dogs.
Well, I know Tennessee was a
hard
hotbed.
time.
Yeah, I can remember. I was a little kid then, but I can remember. And then in going back to Memphis a couple of times, visiting some friends, have learned even more about the situation. And it was a real hotbed. But it obviously had an impact on you. And so, do you sort of feel that dream redirected you?
Oh, there's no question about it, because the next morning I couldn't wait to find out whether or not I had interpreted the dream correctly.
Yeah.
And so that next morning, I'll never forget it. I went to the directory, Dallas directory, and I didn't know whether there was NAACP chapter in Irving or not. So I looked in the book, and I was looking for the Dallas NAACP, but I found the Southwest Regional Office of the NAACP was in Dallas at that time. And so I called at 9 o'clock, and nobody answered. 9:01, nobody answered. 9:02, nobody answered. So finally at 9:04, Shannon Reeves, who is now the president of the Oakland, California branch of NAACP and head of the California Republican Party's campaign or campaign donations for the whole state of California. Shannon's done very well for himself. But that time he was the Southwest Regional Director. And he answered the phone. And I said, this is Anthony Martin. I need to ask you a question. I said, I want to know whether or not, is there an NAACP chapter in Irving? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, man, he said, it's amazing that you would call me. He said, I just opened the door to the office. I heard the phone ringing. I still got my briefcase and all my papers working in my hand. I just rushed over here to answer the phone. And he said, I can't believe this is the first call I'm getting today. He said, we just had our monthly meeting last night. And the last item on the agenda was we was talking about the need for Irving branch of the NAACP.
Wow.
I said, well, no, man, it ain't no coincidence. I said, I appreciate you telling me this. And I said, I told him about my dream. And I asked him what I needed to do. And he told me. He sent me a packet of information. And then the next person I called was Jackie Townsend. And a lot of people don't know this. You know, me and Jackie, a lot of people have tried to pit me and Jackie, and we have had our little battles and disputes, but I love Jackie. I loved her heart. I loved her caring. I loved her commitment to Bear Creek. I just loved how she loved everybody. It didn't make no difference whether you white, black, or blue. That little restaurant she had on there over there was just a hole in the wall. And people came over there just to be with Jackie.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times it wasn't even about the food, even though the food was good.
Food was good. I was there, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah, and I ate over there a lot, too. But a lot of people don't realize this, but I credit Jackie Townsend and Reverend Joshua Hatchett, who was assistant pastor at Ben Washington Baptist Church. I did a lot of the work. But they helped me because I was new. I didn't know that many people. Mm-hmm. And Jackie introduced me to tons of people. Jackie was one of my first members. Her and her husband, Jimmy, one of the first two people to sign up. And Jackie helped me form the Irving branch NAACP. And, you know, in order to form a chapter, you got to get 100 paid members. So Jackie took me around and introduced me to all the black pastors. And then Reverend Hatchett introduced me to a lot of the black pastors, and Pastor Shepherd at Ben Washington. He helped me. A lot of people helped us. But to make a long story short, on October 14th, I'll never forget it, 1994, I got the message from the National Board meeting that we had, our charter had been approved to have an Irving branch of the NAACP.
And then we that you had to have at least 100 members. 100
members.
Where'd they come from?
Oh, everywhere. Oh, you know, but mainly the black churches. I'd say about 1/3 of them came from Ben Washington Baptist Church, and then another lot of them came from Jackie's church, Ebenezer Baptist Church. You know, Kathy, I don't know if you realize it or not, but Ebenezer Baptist Church is one of the oldest churches in Irving. You know, I'm working with Pastor Dwight, not Dwight, Dave, they call him Dave Stevenson, but his name is Zededrick Stevenson. See, his grandfather founded the church. Then his father pastored the church I'd say about 30, 40 years. And now Dave is the third generation of Stevenson, and he's the pastor of the church. It's the oldest black church in Irving. And it's being torn down right now because code enforcement forced them to move out. And they're having their church services in a temporary building right now. You know, I pray that anybody that sees this interview will that loves Jackie. I think Jackie would want the city of Irving and people that loved her to help us and participate with us. We've got a big fundraising campaign going right now to help raise money to rebuild that church. It's the oldest black church. It was Jackie's church. And I tell you, one of the things I remember most about Jackie loved the Lord. And she loved going to church. And that was her home church. And Jackie meant a lot, not only to Ebenezer Baptist Church in Bear Creek, but Jackie meant a lot to the city of Irving. She meant a lot to me, too.